The very first and only nuclear device to have been used in a war was on the 6th of August 1945, when US troops deployed a nuclear bomb. Ironically, it was named Little Boy. It was unleashed on the Japanese city of Hiroshima. It killed more than 100,000 people and affected not just that generation, but the next one as well. 3 days later, another nuclear device named Fat Man was unleashed on the city of Nagasaki. Not since then, not in the last 75 years, has there ever been a nuclear weapon used in combat. But that could very well change in this Russia-Ukraine conflict. At the start of this war, Russian President Vladimir Putin had warned that he was placing his nuclear arsenal on standby. That raised the prospects that Putin could use what are called tactical nuclear weapons or tactical nukes, if not strategic ones. And now Putin's spokesperson, the Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, has also confirmed that tactical nuclear weapons could be used if Russia's existence was threatened. Russia has a first use policy. On Crux DeCode this week, what is a tactical nuclear weapon? How real is Putin's nuclear threat? And will the devastation caused in its aftermath completely change the world as we know it? First, what are tactical nuclear weapons? Now, tactical nuclear weapons, or nukes, are those which could be used over relatively short distances, anywhere between 500 to 1,000 kilometers. Now, this distinguishes them from strategic nuclear weapons. In the Cold War, these were the bombs which the two superpowers, the US and the Soviet Union back then, they possessed this in hundreds of thousands. They could launch them over long distances from each other's territories into the enemy country, as it were. So, how many such tactical nukes does present-day Russia have? Now, most intelligence, Western intelligence estimates suggest that Russia is thought to have about 2,000 tactical nuclear weapons in its entire arsenal. Now, these can be placed on different types of missiles. Now, missiles are normally the vehicles that are used to deliver conventional explosives. Some of them can also be nuclear armed. They can be fired from land, air, or sea. In Russia's case, they have the Iskander missiles, they have the Caliber missiles, which can be used from either land or sea or even air to be launched onto enemy targets. Now, these warheads, nuclear-enabled warheads, are believed to be kept in storage facilities, unlike conventional warheads which are already deployed and are ready to be fired. They're already on the launch vehicle, on the missile. Now, the difference in the nuclear option is the nuclear fuel or the warhead is not kept on the missile, it's currently in storage. The question then is, how powerful are these tactical nukes? Now, tactical nuclear weapons vary enormously in both size as well as, more importantly, in the power that they can unleash. The smallest tactical nuke can be just 1 kiloton. That's about 1,000 tons of the explosive TNT. The larger ones can be as big as 100 kilotons. Just to give you an example, just for comparison's sake, the bomb that was launched over Hiroshima, Little Boy, that was 15 kilotons, and it caused extensive damage. Russia is believed to have bombs that are up to 100 kilotons. That's almost 6 or 7 times more powerful than what we saw in Hiroshima. So, how much of this talk of nuclear weapons and tactical nukes by Vladimir Putin and those in his administration, how much of that threat is real and how much of it is simply bluster? Now, President Putin has made it clear on more than one occasion that he's putting Russia's nuclear weapons on standby, that if it came down to that, he would not hesitate using these nuclear weapons in this ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Now, there are two reasons for this. One is, of course, the very threat of the use of nuclear weapons, and two is to create a sense of fear, to create a sense of panic amongst the enemy. This is more a signal, not just to Ukraine, but more importantly to the West and to NATO, to try and persuade them not to intervene in Ukraine. Now, Putin does not necessarily want to go to nuclear war. He knows that the threshold is high, the costs and the consequences could be devastating, but the threat of the use of a tactical weapon is something that he could use with. Because Putin could use a tactical weapon or threaten to use a tactical weapon just to scare off NATO. Now, there is a theory in international relations. It's called escalate to de-escalate. It's a bit like throwing a monkey into a bunch of birds. The monkey may not kill any of the birds, but it will sure as hell scare the birds away. The idea of these threats of tactical nuclear weapons, more than anything else, is to frighten the other side into backing down. And that is exactly what Vladimir Putin might be doing just now. Now, one thing is very clear. This conflict has been going on for the better part of a month, and it's very evident on the ground that it is grinding into some kind of a stalemate. Neither is Putin able to declare outright victory, nor are the Ukrainians able to push back the Russian troops effectively. So it's more or less grinding into a stalemate. So what does Putin need to do? He needs to be seen as doing something dramatic, something completely escalatory and consequential, if nothing else, to force a decisive outcome in this war. Now, the concern is that if Putin feels cornered and that his strategy in Ukraine is not delivering results as fast as he would want it to, then he could use tactical nuclear weapons as some kind of a game changer. Because after all, once you climb that nuclear escalation ladder, it is going to be a complete game changer in a bid to try and break this stalemate. He cannot afford this grinding stalemate for a good number of weeks to come. He has to force an outcome, and the threat of using a tactical nuclear weapon is to scare the other side into believing that an outcome is almost imminent. In this case, a Russian victory. But then, the question is this: could the use of a tactical nuclear weapon in itself be self-defeating? Because this is not like any conventional weapon. Once you fire it, once you press that red button, there is no going back. Once you cross the nuclear threshold, you cannot scale back. The only time a nuclear weapon was used in combat was, like I said, in World War II. For the last 75 years, the world has seen n number of wars, innumerable wars, from Iraq to Afghanistan to Bosnia, across the world. But no one has ever used a nuclear weapon. Would Vladimir Putin want to be the first and only man since World War II to cross this Rubicon? Now, some folks worry that he has shown a willingness to do things which people thought he would be incapable of doing, that others would not even dare entertain such a thought, whether it's the use of cluster munitions, whether it's the use of hypersonic missiles. All of that has been done in this war. So what is stopping him from using a tactical nuclear weapon? Remember, Russia has a first use doctrine. Many countries around the world, China, India, etc., do not have a first use doctrine, which means they can only use a nuclear weapon if and when they are attacked. In Russia's case, because they have a first use doctrine, it means they can use a tactical nuclear weapon even without the other side using one. All it needs to do is to convince itself that there is an existential threat to Russia. And those are the exact words, existential threat, that the Russian Kremlin spokesperson, Mr. Peskov, said. Now, this war, if anything, is an existential threat more to Ukraine than it is to Russia. But here's the catch. Russia just needs to convince itself and its people that this war is an existential threat, and that is grounds for Russia to launch a tactical nuclear weapon. Now, if Vladimir Putin were to press the red button, if he were to use nuclear weapons, then even neutral countries like China, India, others who have abstained from voting against Putin, they will be forced to break ranks and dump Putin and eventually come together and condemn such an action. Putin would have well and truly, if he were to use tactical nukes, relegated Russia to pariah status. Also, in response, NATO will have no choice but to respond by climbing the nuclear escalatory ladder. Because after all, again, you go back to Charter 5 of the NATO agreement, the NATO Charter, it clearly says an attack on one is an attack on all, and therefore NATO cannot be seen as not responding, or it cannot afford to be seen as responding just in conventional fashion if Vladimir Putin and Russia were to use a tactical nuclear weapon. For now, though, the United States says it is monitoring the situation very closely. They have extensive intelligence gathering machines to watch Russian nuclear activity. For instance, whether its tactical weapons are being moved out of storage or if there is any change in behavior at launch sites. All of this is picked up by US satellites. So far, the Americans are saying they have not seen any significant changes. But let's be clear about one thing. The whole idea that a nuclear weapon can be tactical, it'll serve one purpose and then you can scale back, that itself is a bit of a misnomer. Because once you deploy a nuclear weapon, even a small nuke, the one that was deployed in Hiroshima, that killed 100,000 people. Just wrap your head around that figure. That's an entire city completely annihilated. 3/4 of all the buildings in Hiroshima were burnt to dust. More than 90% of the city's doctors were dead in one go. And that's not all. It even affected the next generation. There were increased cases of leukemia, breast cancer, lung cancer, even among people who were born the next generation in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So it's not just a question of a city or a town of people that we're talking about. It is an entire generation or two that will feel the effect of a nuclear weapon. Is it worth it? Well, in Putin's calculation, it may well be.